Hide me away, O Lord.
Hide me away, O Lord.
Hide me away, O Lord.
Hide me away, Lord, in the day of trouble, 'neath the shadow of your wings.
Hide me away, O Lord.
Hide me away, O Lord.
Give me your peace, 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 Lord, in the day of trouble, 'neath the shadow of your wings.
Give me your peace, O Lord.
Give me your peace, O Lord.
Safe in your dwelling place.
Safe in your dwelling place.
Safe in your dwelling place.
Safe in your dwelling, in the day of trouble, 'neath the shadow of your wings.
Safe in your dwelling place.
Safe in your dwelling place.
Hide me away, O Lord.
Hide me away, O Lord.
Hide me away, O Lord.
Hide me away, Lord, in the day of trouble, 'neath the shadow of your wings.
Hide me away, O Lord.
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 Hide me away, O Lord. Your only Son, no sin to hide, but you have sent him from your side to walk upon this guilty sod, and to become the Lamb of God. Lamb of God, sweet Lamb of God, holy Lamb of God, wash me in His precious blood, my Jesus Christ, the Lamb of God. Your gift of love they crucified, they laughed and scorned Him as He died. The humble King they named a fraud, and sacrificed the Lamb of God. Lamb of God, sweet Lamb of God, holy Lamb of God, wash me in His precious blood, my Jesus Christ, the Lamb of God. I was so lost, I should have died, but you have brought me to your side, to be led by your staff and rod, and to be called the Lamb of God. Lamb of God, sweet Lamb of God, holy Lamb of God, wash me in His precious blood, my Jesus Christ, the Lamb of God. Lamb of God, sweet Lamb of God, holy Lamb of God, wash me in His precious blood, my Jesus Christ, the Lamb of God. Wash me in His precious blood, my Jesus Christ, the Lamb of God.
My life's in you, my strength's in you, my hope's in you, in you.
with all of my life. I will praise you with all of my strength, with all of my life, with all of my strength. All of my hope is in you. My life is in you, and my strength is in you. Lord, my hope is in you, Lord, in you, is in you. My life is in you, and my strength is in you. Lord, my hope is in you, Lord, in you, is in you. I will praise you with all of my life.
All of my
I will praise you with all of my strength, with all of my life, with all of my strength. All of my hope is in you. My life is in you, Lord, my strength is in you. Lord, my hope is in you, Lord, in you, is in you. My life is in you, Lord, my strength is in you. Lord, my hope is in you, Lord, in you, is in you. In you, it's in you. In you, it's in you, it's in you.
Well, good morning, everybody, and happy Mother's Day. I hope you're doing well. We haven't been doing the online service for the past couple of weeks because more people have been in church, but I understand there's going to be a number of people who are out, so I thought we would add this devotional for you guys for Mother's Day. Do you guys know the story of where Mother's Day came from? I actually had to look it up. I didn't know myself, but there was a lady named Anna Jarvis, and she had taken over her mother, after her mother passed away, she took over her mother's Sunday school class at the St. Andrew's Methodist Church, and to honor her mother for the work she had done there, on May 12th, 1907, there in Grafton, West Virginia, she had children hand out flowers to the mothers as an honor and a way of just kind of saying thanks to all the mothers there, and that tradition picked up and has continued on, and I think it's a good and great thing that we do to try to honor mothers. And I want to share with you a couple of quotes that I found about motherhood that I thought that might interest you. Charlie Benetto said, "When you are looking at your mother, you are looking at the purest love you will ever know." James E. Faust said, "The influence of a mother in the lives of her children is beyond calculation." Oliver Wendell Holmes said, "Youth fades, love drops, the leaves of friendship fall. A mother's secret hope outlives them all." And the Bible has some scriptures about motherhood as well. Genesis 3:20 says that Adam named his wife Eve because she would become the mother of all the living. And the word Eve there in Hebrew, I found out as looking into it, is literally helper. But if you look at the root word of where that word for helper comes from, it comes from the word for to live or life. So she was the helper of living. So, and we all know that motherhood is all about life and help. So, here's another Bible verse. It's Proverbs 31:26-31, and that's a verse that talks about godly women and how they're just such a blessing to all of us. And it says, "She speaks wisdom, and faithful instruction is on her tongue. She watches over the affairs of her household and does not eat the bread of idleness. Her children arise and call her blessed. Her husband also, and he praises her. Many women do noble things, but you surpass them all. Charm is deceptive and beauty is fleeting, but a woman who fears the Lord is to be praised. Honor her for all that her hands have done, and let her works bring her praise at the city gate." Psalm 127:3 says that children are a heritage from the Lord, offspring a reward from him. what beautiful words from the Lord about these women that we honor on this day. You know, there's a lot of stories about mothers and motherhood in the Bible, and looking into it, I was really surprised how many of those we had about God's interaction with women and in how they raised children that changed the path of history. So out of these women that found favor in God's eyes and created godly children, we have the story of Elizabeth and Zechariah, who through God's work brought about John the Baptist, who led the way for Christ. We had the story of Jacob and Rachel and their story of Joseph. We had Abraham and Sarah and that incredible story about Isaac. Jochebed, who was the mother of Moses. What an incredible story about motherhood there. Mary, of course, being the mother of Jesus and her story. And then, of course, as we mentioned earlier, Eve, who was the mother of us all. And one of the extremely interesting stories we have here is Hannah and her husband Elkanah, and how through their faithfulness came about the birth of Samuel. So, if you remember a couple of weeks ago, those of you who were in attendance, we talked about the Passover, and we had a Seder meal, like how the Israelite people and the Jewish people, how they celebrated the Passover each year, and we looked at how there were so many calls to the coming Messiah in that Passover meal. And there was one part of that ceremony that I thought was incredibly touching, and it was the Birkat Haner, which was the lighting of the candles. And if you remember, most of the Seder service was led by the father. It's done in your home, but the very first parts, the preparation, was done by the mother, the wife of the family. And what she would do is she would clean the whole house and remove all the leavened bread, if you remember that. And she would prepare the house for this ceremony. But then she was the one to light the candles, and they felt it was appropriate to have the mother of the home do that because of the prophecies where mother, through women, was going to come the light of the world. And so the Messianic Jews saw that as this call that through the women, through the history of the Bible, Jesus would come. And so that was an amazing, for me, it was an amazing opportunity. We had to share that story and remember how they would light that candle, because the women were seen, the mothers were seen as those that bring light. And through that light comes the salvation of the people. And of course, we know that motherhood is not always easy. In Genesis 3, God pretty much promises that motherhood is going to be difficult for Eve. But he also promised the serpent that through Eve's offspring, he would eventually be destroyed. And we know these same names that we mentioned earlier. Elizabeth was blessed with a child, but then that child, John, who was the one who called the way for Jesus, prepared the way for him, he was murdered for his faith. Jochebed, the mother of Moses, we tell that story of how to save his life when they were killing the Israelite babies. She had to make that incredibly difficult decision to what we would almost say today, abandon her baby with the hopes that it would be raised by others. And she placed him in the river, and he was raised by Pharaoh. What a terrible, heartbreaking story. But we saw how God worked through that. And even though Jochebed had no way of knowing, but that act of trusting God with that child grew up to become Moses, who led his people out of bondage and out of freedom, and who led them and formed them to become the people of God. We also saw Jacob and Rachel's son, Joseph, who was betrayed by his own brothers and was sold into captivity. And through his righteousness, he was elevated to the point that even though he had gone through such struggle and difficulty in his life, the preparation that they placed in him, he rose to a position of power and was able to save his people from a great famine. Abraham and Sarah, in their advanced old age, were given Isaac. And at one time, they were even asked to sacrifice that child. And with their faithfulness, willingness to do so, God spared them. And through Abraham and Sarah, in their advanced age and everything, they became the father of the nation, the parents of the nation of Israel. And of course, Mary, who found favor in God's eyes and was chosen to carry the Christ child and bring the Messiah into the world. And as much, around Christmas, we had actually read the song of Mary and how she just glorified the Lord for that opportunity. But we also know the other part of the story. She also witnessed her son falling to the cruelty and the inhumanity of those that he had come to save. And then Hannah, who we're going to be talking about today, prayed for a son and promised that if she received that son, if God would bless her with that son, that she would dedicate his life to the Lord and give that child to God. And he became an incredible prophet and judge over Israel. And we all know the story of him with Saul and with David. And he was just such a key figure. And the leading his people in right paths. These men were mentioned, and they were people who brought honor to God because they were mothered correctly by godly women. And they brought light into the world. All of these are examples of men who, thanks to their godly parenting they received, were prepared to do God's work, and they prepared the way for the kingdom of God. So let's talk about Samuel. We mentioned Hannah, his mother. Let's talk about Samuel for a minute. Here's just a little bit of his biography, a very small snippet of it. He was a prophet. He lived in the around the 11th century BC, that some people think is around 1056 to 1004 before Christ. That was before Christ. He was the last judge of Israel and the first of the prophets after Moses. He inaugurated the monarchy by choosing and appointing Saul and David as kings of Israel. Samuel succeeded Eli as the high priest and judge of Israel. Samuel made annual circuits where he would judge the people, exhort them to stop worshiping idols, and used his influence to hold tribes together. He seemed able to penetrate the future in kind of a way and lead the people from going astray and going into a better path going forward, following God. And the people looked upon him as a great prophet for being able to do so. And Samuel, though counted among the greatest of the judges like Moses, is also numbered among the prophets. He was a hero who rallied the spirit of his people in the midst of oppression, keeping alive their hope and faith. So let's read a little bit about how Samuel's life began and the influence that his mother had over that life. We're going to be reading today from 1 Samuel chapter 1 through 28. There was a certain man from Ramathaim, a Zuphite from the hill country of Ephraim, whose name was Elkanah, son of Jeroham, the son of Elihu, the son of Tohu, the son of Suph, an Ephraimite. He had two wives. One was called Hannah, and the other Peninnah. Peninnah had children, but Hannah had none. Year after year, this man went up from his town to worship and sacrifice to the Lord Almighty at Shiloh, where Hophni and Phinehas, the two sons of Eli, were priests of the Lord. Whenever the day came for Elkanah to self-sacrifice, he would give portions of the meat to his wife, Peninnah, and to all of her sons and daughters, but to Hannah he gave a double portion because he loved her. And the Lord had closed her womb. Because the Lord had closed Hannah's womb, her rival kept provoking her in order to irritate her. This went on year after year. Whenever Hannah went up to the house of the Lord, her rival provoked her till she wept and would not eat. Her husband Elkanah would say to her, Hannah, why are you weeping? Why don't you eat? Why are you downhearted? Don't I mean more to you than 10 sons? Once, when they had finished eating and drinking in Shiloh, Hannah stood up. Now Eli, the priest, was sitting on his chair by the doorpost of the Lord's house. In her deep anguish, Hannah prayed to the Lord, weeping bitterly, and she made a vow, saying, Lord Almighty, if you will only look on your servant's misery and remember me, and not forget your servant, but give her a son, then I will give him to the Lord for all the days of his life, and no razor will ever be used on his head. And as she kept praying to the Lord, Eli observed her mouth. Hannah was praying in her heart, and her lips were moving, but her voice was not heard. Eli thought she was drunk, and he said to her, How long are you going to stay drunk? Put away your wine. Not so, my lord, Hannah replied. I am a woman who is deeply troubled. I have not been drinking wine or beer. I was pouring out my soul to the Lord. Do not take your servant for a wicked woman. I have been praying here out of my great anguish and grief. Eli answered, Go in peace, and may the God of Israel grant you what you have asked of him. She said, May your servant find favor in your eyes. Then she went her way and ate something, and her face was no longer downcast. Early the next morning she arose and worshipped before the Lord, and then went back to her home at Ramah. Elkanah made love to his wife Hannah, and the Lord remembered her. So in the course of time, Hannah became pregnant and gave birth to a son. She named him Samuel, saying, Because I asked the Lord for him. When her husband Elkanah went up with all his family to offer the annual sacrifice to the Lord and to fulfill his vow, Hannah did not go. She said to her husband, After the boy is weaned, I will take him and present him before the Lord, and he will live there always. Do what seems best to you, her husband Elkanah told her. Stay here until you have weaned him. Only may the Lord make good his word. So the woman stayed at home and nursed her son until she had weaned him. And he was weaned. When he was weaned, she took the boy with her, young as he was, along with a 3-year-old bull, an ephah of flour, and a skin of wine. They brought him to the house of the Lord at Shiloh. When the bull had been sacrificed, they brought the boy to Eli. And she said to him, Pardon me, my Lord, as surely as you live, I am the woman who stood here beside you praying to the Lord. I prayed for this child, and the Lord has granted me what I asked of him. So now I give him to the Lord for his whole life. He will be given over to the Lord. And he worshiped the Lord, and he worshiped the Lord there. And then, as we know, as we read the biography later, Samuel became a great man. Now, how did he become a great man of God? Well, the first thing we saw was how he got his start. His mother found favor in the Lord. Well, if you remember correctly, when she told Eli what she was praying for, and he realized she wasn't a drunkard, she was anguished and really praying out of faith. He basically encouraged her in her faithfulness, and she asked that she could be seen with favor. And then we find later that the Lord remembered her. So what is this thing that we're talking about finding favor? What does it mean to find favor in the Lord? Well, it's being found to possess righteousness, obedience, faithfulness, right? Humility and integrity. That's I was looking into that to try to find a description of what it means to find favor in the eyes of someone or in the Lord, and that was basically what came up. If you were found to have righteousness, obedience, faith, and humility and integrity, you are seen as favorable. You are found favorable in someone's eyes or in the Lord's eyes, spiritually speaking. So let's look at Psalm 5:12 that actually speaks about that. It says, Surely, Lord, you bless the righteous, and you surround them with your favor as a shield. So there we have this encouragement that if we are righteous, then the Lord responds to that righteousness, right? So, where have we also seen that kind of statement? If you remember the story of Mary, Luke 1:30, what was said there? But the angel said to Mary, "Do not be afraid, Mary. You have found favor with God." She was someone recognized with God as being someone righteous, obedient, and having the integrity to be entrusted with this life he was going to give her. So that was one step. This idea or this understanding that Samuel's mother was an obedient, righteous person and worked towards finding favor in God's eyes. We also saw here in verse 27 the importance of her prayer. 1 Samuel 1:27 says, "I prayed for this child, and the Lord granted me what I asked of him." And we saw in the beginning, that she was praying so fervently that Eli didn't even understand what was going on. Thought she was drunk. She was praying. She was a prayerful, obedient person. Every child should be the product of prayer. Every child should witness the power of their parents or their mothers, their fathers praying for them. 1 Thessalonians 5:17, I've been using this verse all the time now, says, "Pray continually." There's power in prayer to the Lord. And so, how does Samuel become a great man of God? He's brought about by someone who is righteous and who's invested in their own righteousness, but also he's the product of prayer. I'll read you a poem real quick. I almost forgot. It's called A Mother's Prayer, and it's written by Ruth Bell Graham, which speaks about a mother's prayer. "Listen, Lord, a mother's praying, low and quiet. Listen what her tears are saying, see her heart. Upon its knees, lift a load from her bowed shoulders, till she sees and understands you who hold the worlds together. Hold her problems in your hands." It's universally understood that part of the power that drives children forward is their mother's prayers. Thank God for praying mothers. Okay, and so let's go on to the next step. Another step that we see that led to Samuel's success and becoming a great man of God was that Samuel's mother was faithful and brought him to the Lord at an early age. Let's look here at 1 Samuel 1:21 through 24. When her husband Elkanah went up with all his family to offer the annual sacrifice to the Lord and to fulfill his vow, Hannah did not go. She said to her husband, "After the boy is weaned, I will take him and present him to the Lord, and he will live there always. Do what seems best to you." That's an understanding husband, right? So the woman stayed at home and nursed her son until she had weaned him. And after he was weaned, she took the boy with her, young as he was, along with a 3-year-old bull, an ephah of flour, and a skin of wine, and brought him to the house of the Lord at Shiloh. She was faithful to her promise. She promised God that if the Lord would bless her with this child, she would dedicate him to the Lord's service. And so as soon as he was ready, he was brought to the place of worship of the Lord. So in our language, she dressed him up and she took him to church and took it seriously and impressed upon him the importance of worshiping God and getting to know him. Another way that Samuel became a successful great man of God is that his mother recognized and honored God's ownership of Samuel's life. Let's look at Samuel 1, verse 28. So now I give him to the Lord. For his whole life he will be given over to the Lord. And he worshiped the Lord there. We are entrusted with our children, but they belong to the Lord. We are entrusted with our own lives, but our lives belong to the Lord. Our children are a heritage from the Lord, and we are responsible to guide them spiritually. And we are ordained with that purpose, and we must be committed to leading our children and leading ourselves towards knowing God and serving him. So, what's another step that we learn from the example of Hannah and other godly mothers? Well, we learn that we must have faith that the Lord has planned for the lives of our children. We must do our part to prepare them. It's so hard sometimes as a parent. I haven't been a parent as long as many of you. We have a lot of experience of motherhood and parenthood in our congregation. We have grandmothers and I think some great-grandparents as well. But one thing I've learned is it's not always easy. As we mentioned earlier, even Eve was promised it wasn't going to be easy. And we don't always understand the paths that our children follow. We may not agree with them. We might not understand what God's plan for their lives are. But we do know that we have the responsibility to prepare them to make the right decisions. We don't know where God's path will go. We don't know what challenges they will face, and we can't reach in and make those decisions for them. But our job is to prepare them and to speak truth to them and help them grow in the Lord so that they make good decisions. We may never understand God's plans for their lives. We must only trust and obey and have faith that God will do his part to build upon the faith that we have instilled in our children. And our children will go through struggles. I've heard people with older children and grown children talk about how it never ends. You always worry about your children. They always go through struggles, just as we go through struggles in our own lives. We can't prevent that, but we can pray, we can guide, and we can prepare. So, we don't always know how things are going to turn out, but thank God for faithful mothers with their unconditional love. And we know sometimes mothers' hearts get broken, but they never give up loving. I want to read you a poem. It's called Another Poem. It's by the same author, the one we read before. It's also by Ruth Bell Graham, and it's called Had I Been Joseph's Mother. Had I been Joseph's mother, I'd have prayed protection from his brothers. God, keep him safe. He is so young, so different from the others. Mercifully, she never knew there would be slavery and prison too. Had I been Moses' mother, I'd have wept to keep my little son, praying she might forget the babe drawn from the water of the Nile. Had I not kept him for her, nursing him the while? Was he not mine, and she but Pharaoh's daughter? Had I been Mary, oh, had I been she, I would have cried as never a mother cried, anything, O God, anything but crucified. With such prayers importunate, my finite wisdom would assail infinite wisdom. God, how fortunate infinite wisdom should prevail. Wow, what powerful words. We don't always know where the path leads, but we do know that we have a faithful God, and if we are faithful in doing our part, then we just give our children a little bit more hope in this difficult world. So, what have we learned today about godly mothers? 1, godly mothers practice righteousness, and they invest themselves and they discipline themselves to find favor in the eyes of the Lord. That's a lesson for all of us, men, women, children, young and old included. The great importance of dedicating our lives to living right following the truth, and seeking favor in God's eyes. And also, we must become prayer warriors, deeply engaged in a ministry of prayer, deeply committed to praying over and praying for those entrusted to us and those all around us, praying for ourselves for strength to carry on and do the right thing, and praying for our children, and praying for our neighbors. We must also faithfully lead our families to the Lord. We must teach them truth even when it's not easy or comfortable, and prepare each other and our children for kingdom living so that they may live holy lives as God intends. Then we must also humbly recognize and honor that we and our children's, that ours and our children's lives belong to the Lord. They're not ours. They belong to Him. We are just entrusted with these lives at a time, but our lives are actually, they actually belong to the Lord. And we must trust that the Lord, in His faithfulness, in His goodness, and in His wisdom, that He is always faithful, and He demands our faithfulness. Thank you to all the mothers out there who strive to be good teachers, good caregivers, and godly servants, helping to raise the next generation of Christians. And thank you to our congregation who is dedicated to supporting the mothers and fathers of our congregation, praying for their children, and also willing to be there to give any support that we can, because we are all in this together. We're all God's children, and I want to see us all do well and find favor in God's eyes. Thank you so much. Happy Mother's Day. May you have a blessed day. Goodbye.
Open my